Hi everyone, my name is Florin and I'm a developer advocate at JetBrains. I'm very happy that you're here with me today because we'll have an exciting webinar. Together with me, we'll have Derek Parker and Allessandro Arzilli, better known for their work in the Go community as the creators and maintainers of Delve, the Go debugger. Before we get started and get to the introduction part and so on, let me address a few common questions that we receive for all our webinars. Yes, we'll have the possibility for you to get answers to your questions, but you need to ask your questions. So if you do see something that you want to learn more about, or if you have questions about how Delve works, what the future plans are, and so on, jump in the question section and we'll be happy to address them. Of course, the webinar will be recorded and it's going to be made available in a few days. We will also publish a follow-up blog post with all the questions and answers that you will have throughout the webinar, as well as maybe answering to some more complex questions that cannot be perhaps responded in the normal course of the webinar. Throughout this webinar, we'll discuss how Delve was created, what started it, what are the challenges of maintaining a open source project, the complexity of Delve. We'll also talk about the Go changes and how they affect Delve, and maybe the other way around, if Delve has any input into the Go development. And we'll also try and see some cool features and favorite parts of Delve from its creators. That being said, let me introduce my guests. And first, we'll have Derek on joining us.
So, hello.
Hey, Derek. Please say a few words for the audience to get to know you.
Yeah, of course. As mentioned, my name is Derek. I am the creator of Delve and still active maintainer, contributor to the project. I work at Red Hat as a senior software engineer, where I get to work on Delve and upstream Go stuff and all kinds of other stuff.
Cool, thank you. And next, the other guest that we have, Allessandro, please join us and say a few words as well.
Hey everyone, my name is Allessandro. I've been contributing to Delve since 2015, so pretty early on. And I've been programming with Go in my spare time since, I think, the Paleolithic or something like that. It was before the Go language had the append function or a Go command.
Wow. Cool, awesome. So we have someone that predates me in terms of Go development. That's cool. That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's really lovely that that you're here. Before we continue, let's talk a bit about what's Delve, how you got to start the project, Derek, and then maybe do a short demo of how Delve works.
Sure. Yeah, I can dig into a little bit about what it is and the origin story a little bit. So just briefly about what it is, Delve is a debugger specifically for the Go programming language. So it knows a lot of details about how Go works, the internals, the runtime, Go types, and just some of the different quirky things about the Go language. In general, Delve has a lot of intimate, intricate knowledge about a lot of those things, making it able to debug Go programs a lot better than a general purpose debugger. And then as far as how the project got started, it was actually 7 years ago this last May. I think that the first commit, I looked it up recently, is the first commit was 7 years ago this past May. And kind of the inspiration for starting it was, I believe I had just gotten back from, I believe it was the first GopherCon. And so I was there, and I think one of the talks got canceled or shuffled around or something like that. So instead of the normal talk, they had like a panel discussion with some of the Go core team. I think Rob Pike was on it, maybe Robert Griesemer, some other folks. And during the course of that discussion, there was a discussion about like debugging Go programs. And it was mentioned by somebody on the panel. It might have been Rob Pike, but I can't remember exactly. But that basically like GDB exists, but it wasn't really doing a good job. There was a lot of like, quirks with the Go language and the runtime and stuff like that would trip you up a lot if you were using GDB. And it just wasn't really a sufficient solution. And a lot of the documentation at the time said so as well. So when I had gotten back, I was still working at this company called HashRocket, and they were like a consultancy. But every Friday evening we got what was just called like open source time. Like you're free to do pretty much whatever you want. So in that time, I just started kind of hacking away at this idea that I had of like a Go specific debugger. And within like a few months, I had something usable, and then just kept going from there. Eventually announced it, and people started using it, and it just kind of took off from there, which has been really exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember the first GopherCon. Indeed, that panel was unexpected, but it seems that from one unexpected panel, we got one awesome debugger. So
crazy how life works.
That's good. Indeed. So thank you so much for the short introduction on how Delve got started. Alessandro, how did you start your work with Delve?
I think I saw a post about Delve on Hacker News or something like that, a website like that, and I wanted at the time to experiment with different user interfaces for debuggers, and I thought, well, I experimented a little while with GDB, the machine interface for GDB. That's quite complicated to get it to do what you want. And I thought, well, if it's in Go and I can call directly to its function, maybe it will be easier to do my experiments. So I started working on it, and I started fixing things inside it, and one thing led to another. I found it pretty fun to work on a debugger. It's an interesting project, so that's what happened.
Cool. And well, from that exactly. You went on being the most active contributor to Delve, to the best of my knowledge. So yeah, probably. Congrats on that. Cool. So let's do a bit of a short demo for the people that may be interested in what Delve is and how it looks like and so on. And maybe you can also guide me into how the command line came to be and why it looks like that and so on. Delve, when you compile it, you can do a go get, and it's going to be installed. And then the simplest way to invoke it would be to have a directory where you say Delve debug. And that launches the Go compiler in the background, correct?
Correct.
And then you basically can type your commands here. So I think this looks similar to other debuggers. So
yeah, familiar.
Let's go with
familiar three-letter prompt.
Yeah. So this is how the whole command list looks like, which I remember when it was much, much smaller. So
we have to break it into categories.
And you have some aliases too, which makes things a lot easier to use and type. So what would be
we like simplicity.
Indeed. What would be the first thing that you can do here when you get into the prompt? Derek, maybe you can.
Yeah, I think probably the first thing you're going to want to do is set a breakpoint someplace. So when you start up like with Delve debug, basically what it's doing behind the scenes is it does invoke the Go compiler, and it invokes it in such a way that like it builds the binary for you in order for Delve to debug it, but it builds it without certain optimizations and things like that to make it like the ideal binary for debugging and figuring out what's going on. So then once it compiles it, it starts it up for you, attaches to it, and begins the debug session. And then from there, you're kind of like right at the entry point of the binary. Like you haven't even gotten to main yet. You're still in runtime setup code and stuff. So the first thing I typically do if I'm just doing like an exploratory session is I'll set a breakpoint on main or something and just continue there.
So if I remember correctly, you do it by saying something like breakpoint main.main.
That's correct.
Or, yeah. And then you get this output. And to run the debugger, you simply invoke the continue command.
Yes.
And that's it. We've started debugging our application. From here, you can also see some things like how many Go routines were being hit by the breakpoint, what's the total count of that, and so on. So I remember when adding this feature was really useful to debug some really complex application. So what people would be able to do here is to list the source code, perhaps, right? Or continue with the debugging. Which one should we do first? Let's say listing.
Yeah, I'd say so. Turn on a light, see what's going on around you.
Okay. And say I've lost my way here. The help command still works after I start the debugger, correct?
Of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. So in case you're stuck, you're like, hey, I don't know how to use Delve. I've seen the presentation. I put a breakpoint using B, and now what? Then you can invoke the help command everywhere, right? And in this case, you have some interesting section like here where you say view program variables and memory and so on, right? Which can display a bunch of information about the variables, your locals, and so on and so forth. You can see the listing for threads and Go routines. And this is super useful because there's a difference in Go between threads and Go routines, right? And that helps people that are just starting to get to know the Go language debugger better and Go itself better, right? Thanks to having Go routines view rather than threads as other debuggers may do. And you can also do some other commands to view the stack and so on. But the most important part would be, okay, how do I list this without looking at all the documentation? How do I see where my source code is?
A list.
Right? Sounds good. Okay, so I'm in main. Let's jump to the next line.
I think you have some configuration that only shows one line of code every time you list the source code.
Exactly. So one thing that I wanted to mention is that you can configure Delve to set it up to your own liking, right? For example, I have a config file which says, okay, Delve, don't show me too much of the source code, show me just this part. Because that's how I interact with the debugger. Cool. So you can go through the next function, through the next steps using the next command or n, as I'm doing here. And you can also jump into the execution, right? So you can do a step into execution, which, if I remember correctly, it's S, the alias for it. Yes, or step. But there's also a step instruction, right? So what would be the difference?
Step instruction executes a single assembly instruction. If you want to see assembly instruction, you say disas, and it will show you the assembly of the parent function.
I think, yeah. maybe it's a bit of a longer function.
Well, so in this case, it would just execute the call instruction, right? So if you did the stack instruction, and it would
Okay,
go
so let's
inside
do.
the runtime.
Awesome. So if I am to debug a more complex application where perhaps I need to view assembly, this is how I can also step through assembly code.
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. So what's next? How do I, let's say I want to step out. There's a command for that too. It's called step out, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And now I'm back to my function. And we can continue this as much as we want. You'll also get to see the return values, which is pretty awesome because sometimes it's hard to figure out what's happening there. So all in all, this is a very simple demonstration of how you can quickly start playing around with Delve, do a debugging session, and make sure that everything works. Now, when I stopped my debugging session, you can see that I'm back to the prompt, right? So I'm not in the operating system, I'm still in Delve. But you can also type exit once again, and yeah, you're out back to the operating system. Now, you mentioned something about the Delve building the binary without optimizations and so on and so forth. Maybe we can jump a bit into what's your favorite feature from the debugger, or maybe show this feature first of how building a binary through Delve works, and then tell me, hey, this is my favorite feature, and I want to show you how it works in source code. What do you think?
Yeah, we could maybe show a little bit about how Delve builds the binary or something like that. It's not too exciting. We just pass a couple flags to like turn off like certain inlining and turn off a few optimizations. Just the Go compiler by default, it's not like GCC or something like that where you have to tell it the optimizations that you want to turn on or whatever. It'll just run with all optimizations enabled by default. And so you kind of have to do the opposite, tell it to calm down a little bit and produce a less optimized binary. But yeah, we have, I think it's in like go build.go somewhere. There's the code that actually builds the program. So you can see we append a few flags, GC flags, all -n-l, and then the flags change a little bit depending on the Go version being used potentially, and so that's something that we kind of have to be like cognizant of as like when we're working on Delve is the support matrix of Go versions that we support and the differences between the versions and things like that even crops up here when we're building. But you'll see that a lot throughout like the code base is like just doing special things for different Go versions and handling that throughout the years. But yeah, this is in the code. This is kind of where the initial magic happens, building the binary, and then getting it ready for the debug session.
Okay, so let's start with your favorite feature, and then we'll switch to Alessandro's favorite feature. Maybe we can go a bit through the code, how it works, and so on.
Yeah, let's see. I think one of my favorite features, I don't know if we can show, but it's the record replay debugging, but it's Linux only. But there's a few other things that I really like. I mean, I really like one of my favorite features is kind of like a less traditional debugging feature, which is like the ability to do tracing. So like not necessarily jumping into like a full debug session, but if you just want to quickly kind of spy on your program a little bit, I've always kind of liked the idea of tracing, like using strace or dtrace or something like that, little like somewhat less invasive. So Delve has a tracing feature as well that works somewhat similar. You can invoke it from the command line and do like dlv trace, and then provide like so you provide a regular expression, and that regular expression will like set a trace point on any like function that matches it. So that it's from the command line, DLV trace.
Right.
Okay. But yeah, that's kind of, I've always liked that feature a lot. Just, if you don't want to jump into like a full on interactive session, just being able to kind of spy a little bit, I think is always pretty fun.
Okay, so the trace command, much like the breakpoint command, it actually needs a breakpoint location, right? So we can say something like fake.go, and I think, well, it would be useful to know the line numbers. Let me see, line 70. So you can set a breakpoint like this, right? And now if I start the binary, I should be able to see this output, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the output that you talked about.
Yeah. So yeah. So in the I don't know if it shows it through the trace point set within the debug session, but when you do like DLV trace just from the command line, like as a sub command, it'll show return values and stuff as well.
So DLV trace, okay.
Well, you have to provide like a function name or something for it to trace.
Oh, see, I haven't used this one too much. Give me a second. Make request. Do I need to specify the package too?
You could just do make request. It might set breakpoints on more things, but
it's fine. For demonstration purposes, should be okay. And this is how the output looks like. Yeah, it's a bit different indeed.
Yeah.
So I don't have any returns because I guess that's what it's trying to show here. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I have a different function quickly that does any returns. I don't think I actually have a function that does return. Well, I could do home handler. Right. So this is pretty useful. To trace it, as you said, it's pretty neat. Yeah, it doesn't like me because I'm returning an HTTP response, which, well, I know. Sorry, I'm not returning anything. Because, yeah. So we're out of luck today.
You can try it at home. But yeah, that's kind of been like that's a nice like feature that I like. I also like being able to call a function is really cool. That was like coordination from our team and the Go compiler team, and Allessandro worked on a lot of that on our end of it. So that might be his favorite feature too. But I like that one a lot. It's really cool to be able to do that because it took coordination between the two teams, and it's just a fun feature, and it makes it seem more interactive.
Cool, thank you. What about you, Alessandro? Is your favorite function feature?
Well, there are several candidates, and record and replay debuggers are actually pretty cool in general. But I would say that probably my favorite thing is that I think we did a decent job with the API. We have an API layer that you can call from outside the debugger to write your own front end, which is what Golang and also VS Code Go and pretty much everything, every graphical debugger for Go is using. It's our JSON RPC API for Delve. And I think we did a decent job at keeping backwards compatibility through the years. And essentially abstracting the whole debugging complexity on this API. So you don't have to worry about the operating system. You don't have to worry about different versions of Go. The API call works anyway. I think that was a decent accomplishment on our part, especially if we compare it to what other debuggers have done. We did okay.
Yeah, I think I can speak for many people implementing the Delve API both in RPC or DApp or anything else. You did an amazing job on that side. So yeah, that congratulations for doing such a complex work. Which I guess takes us to the next section of what we want to talk about. How do you get affected by Go versions, and how do you maintain compatibility, right, in the API and so on with other clients?
Yeah. It's weird about different Go versions because things that affect the community a lot sometimes do not affect Delve, the debugger, at all, or almost at all, or not at all completely. For example, when Go modules was released, that was a big deal for many tools in the Go ecosystem. But for us, it was like 0 lines of code changed to make it work. It just worked directly. So, but in contrast, sometimes there are some features that are either not discussed at all or barely discussed in the community that affects Delve a lot. For example, the register HBI that's going to come in Go 1.17 was a big deal for us. And before that, the other big change we had to support was asynchronous preemption, which I bet like 50% of the Go programmers didn't even know it happened, right? So there's this interesting difference. Many of the releases do not change anything at all for Delve. They are completely inconsequential or almost completely inconsequential. But sometimes you have these really big, complicated runtime changes that are almost invisible to end users, but very important for us.
That's most of what we end up having to special case for in the Delve code is like Allessandro mentioned, stuff that like the normal Go programmer may not even know exists or never has to interact with directly, or kind of working around weird things within Go, like weird issues with the dwarf debug information, or a special case thing with the runtime that we have to be really careful of when we're like unwinding the stack or doing like a certain thing that could change version to version. So yeah, we're pretty like Delve is very aware of like the runtime internals and a lot of the internals of Go and stuff like that. So anytime any of that kind of stuff changes, it affects Delve, but it's stuff that like it'll affect a user if like maybe their binary is a little bit faster or a little bit smaller or something like that. But you know, not any direct impact. But for us, we have some of that special casing code kind of littered throughout the code base for different versions.
Cool, I see. So speaking of major changes and so on, Dirk or maybe Alessandro, I don't know who's better to talk a bit about generics, 118 and so on.
Generics is not.
Oh, sorry, Dirk first.
Yeah. I was gonna say we've been kind of working together with the Go compiler team. We have like some like regularly scheduled meetings with some of the folks there. So we've kind of been discussing this feature and how it's going to impact Delve and things like that. But a lot of the work for a feature like this and for some features is it kind of falls on the compiler team to provide the correct information for us to use and get it to a point where we can actually start like testing the debugger against it and things like that. So there's a lot of like lockstep development with some of these kind of features. Yeah.
Alessandro, how do you see
I think
it?
that generics is not going to be a huge feature for us, actually. In practice, I think if we stopped developing Delve today and never added any line of code for generics, everything would continue to work fine, except for a few variables with generic type in generic functions. Everything else would work exactly as it does now. I fully expect when generics are finally merged and turned on in the Go compiler, our test suite for Delve will continue to pass unchanged. And really, the big thing that we have to do is to find the type for generic variables. That's the big thing that we will have to do. And it's essentially going to be the same thing that we do for the concrete type of interfaces, assuming that the current plan for implementing generics does not change. That's all.
Cool, I see. So maybe it's a bit controversial, but I do have to ask both of you. Alessandro, you first. Generics in Go, are they needed or not? Yes or no?
Absolutely. I think I always thought that Go had to have some kind of generic capabilities. And the only thing I think is that I would have wanted it to be less complete, I guess. I think all of the stuff with constraint is not needed, in my opinion. And I hope it does not get used too much in the community. What I'm scared about is not the syntax, really, it's the people. It's a seldomly needed feature, generics, that gets almost universally abused by people for because we don't have any memetic safeguards to it. If it can be generic, people will make it generic, even if there is only one instantiation. That's what I think about it.
Derek, what about you? Yes or no?
I'm yes on the feature as well. I'm excited for the feature. I share similar hesitancies as Alessandro. I think some of the complexities that it introduces as far as constraints on generic types and stuff like that. I think that stuff is interesting, and it's interesting from like a theory perspective, like programming language theory and stuff like that, being able to specify these kind of types and stuff like that. And I've experimented with like similar features in Rust and things like that. But my favorite thing about Go is that I don't have to in terms of like syntax, like when I'm like, I was going to say I don't have to think when I'm writing Go, but that's not exactly true. I don't have to think about like what I'm typing when I'm writing Go. It's pretty much just like it just kind of like flows. I don't have to think about complex syntax or anything like that. So that's the only thing that I'm a little bit hesitant about. But about the feature in general, I'm excited for it. I think Go needs some sort of generics, and I'll definitely be updating a few pieces of code to take advantage of it one day.
Cool, thank you. What about new features for Go? Like something that's missing and you'd really want to see? Derek?
I don't have anything off the top of my head, actually. New features. I don't know. I'll think about it. Maybe come back to me later.
Sure. Or maybe improvements in the future. Yeah, sure. What about you, Alessandro?
So I think actually my answer is nothing. I think we have had one big change recently, which is modules, and we are going to have a second big change with generics. And what I would like to see for a while is no visible user visible changes to make everything settle, have the community digest both of these big changes completely before more changes are made to the language. Historically, Go was a language that changed very slowly, and it's definitely not changing extremely fast still, but I would like to see it settle down and get digested. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good that's a great response. It kind of goes back to like it's just simple. It's just a simple language, like keep it easy. I don't want to have to think about it too much.
So if I were to summarize the most awaited feature from both of you would be no new feature.
User visible feature.
User visible
Yes.
features. Yeah, I could
To
see
be clear,
maybe.
it doesn't have anything to do with my maintenance of Delve. It's not like we don't want to make any work on Delve. There could be plenty of changes to the runtime which will affect us, but are not user visible features.
Yeah, I would say maybe like if I were to think of one thing, like if I had to answer, I would say maybe error handling. But I've looked over some of the error handling proposals and stuff for Go 2, and none of them have been like all that exciting. And that kind of goes back to like adding syntactical complexity to the language, which is really just syntactical sugar. So yeah, nothing concrete there, but maybe not having to type if error does not equal nil, or some other creative way of doing it. But again, I don't want to have to think about a bunch of syntactical sugar or anything like that.
Yeah, agreed. So thank you. Let's jump to the next question. And before we do that, I should say for the people watching us that yes, you can ask your questions throughout the webinar. I have a list of them prepared. And if they fit into the flow of the conversation, I'll make sure to ask them. If not, they'll be asked at the end. Don't worry about it. So don't delay until the end. Talking about the Go itself and how it interacts with Go, you showed earlier that there are quite a few cases in the compiler where you had to perhaps manage the complexity from the Go itself, right? Because it keeps changing and evolving. How is it like to support such a big open source project, and how do you manage all the complexity? Derek first.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think we have a few things that work in our favor a little bit, like from the Delve side of thing. And that is like I mentioned, we have pretty regular meetings with some of the core Go developers. So we discuss changes, and we have like, we can actually sit together and discuss any changes that are coming up or how they're going to affect Delve specifically, and how we can kind of work around them. And then on top of that, there are things that change version to version, but overall Go is pretty consistent, even on the internal, like the internals and the runtime and stuff like that. And any time that there is a change in there, it's usually very well discussed beforehand, and we kind of have a decent amount of heads up, or our CI breaks on tip and we figure out what's going on. But due to like how Go releases happen and the cadence, the scheduling of it and stuff like that, we usually have a pretty good amount of lead time before a new version ships with an internal runtime change and when we actually have to support it. So I think the combination of all of that stuff makes it like pretty easy, and we have like a relatively conservative support matrix as far as what versions of Go Delve, any given Delve version can support. So that kind of limits our exposure in a way too, where it's like, we only support like three versions at any given time, which kind of represents it could represent like a year and a half worth of changes in the Go compiler. But we usually have a lot of lead time, and we can usually get things fixed and working before the new version of Go comes out.
Cool. Alessandro, maybe you can talk a bit about how is it to support multiple architectures and platforms? How's that complexity?
That's fairly complicated, especially adding new ones. we've had most of our alternative architecture contributed from outside. I think at this point, like Linux on 32-bit was contributed from outside, ARM64 was contributed from outside on both Linux and macOS. Same thing with Windows and FreeBSD, all contributed from outside. And we have a continuous integration suite that we run on every change. And a whole lot of integration tests, which we do not call integration tests internally, but they are, because they launch, compile and launch a program and debug it automatically. So I think it counts as an integration test, whatever.
I see.
And we try to keep them passing.
Yeah,
and of course, I mean, we are communicating with the compiler through a file format that's called Dwarf. So we have some sort of insulation from many of the changes that there are, and the compiler has insulation from us. So that helps a lot.
Yeah, I would just to jump in on this, I would say that the hardest part about supporting multiple architectures is finding CI to run all of the architectures and operating systems.
Cool. So that brings me to the next question. A nice segue here. Recently, you migrated from a previous CI solution to TeamCity Cloud. As a small disclosure, TeamCity Cloud is our CI/CD pipeline offering that we hope you'll test it out if you haven't already. And now the TeamCity Cloud offering, we just started to roll it out. It's going to allow you to basically use TeamCity as you would any other cloud-based services without having to install it on premises like previously you would. Speaking about TeamCity and CI pipelines and so on, Alessandro, maybe you want to talk a bit about the experience of how was it to migrate to TeamCity, or any
It was
problems?
completely fine. I mean, you helped us with that a lot. So, I mean, no one's there to complain. We used to leech from some free offerings for continuous integration for open source, and now we are leeching off of you. So it's great. Right. So I really like the feature that TeamCity has, that you can upload a patch and it compiles and runs only that patch on a specific builder. I really like that feature. I wish it had an API, so I would write a command line client to do it automatically. But it's great, even as it is.
Okay, I'll pass this request along to my colleagues. Maybe there is some API there that we can surface out. Derek, any words on this, or?
Yeah, I mean the transition to using it has been really great. Like Alessandro mentioned, a lot of folks on your side helped us out with that and did a lot of the like real like work to get it working and get it over. And we've just been kind of like updating it and modifying it as we go. And using it has been really nice. I mean, we replaced like 2 other CIs solutions with just TeamCity. We still have one other that we rely on as well. But I mean, even just trading 2 for 1, and then you know, I like the interface and everything like that, and the builds and everything have been really reliable. So yeah, from my perspective, it's been really nice.
Oh, thank you. Good to know. So here's a question from the audience. Do you have any tests for the CLI? And if so, what approach do you use? Just executing from within Go? And I don't know which one is better qualified on this one.
We have very few tests for the command line interface. We make sure to test everything else behind that. And the few tests that we are running, we essentially, what we do is we redirect the standard output to a pipe. We collect the output and we check what's going on. If I recall correctly, I wrote that code a very long time ago, and I don't really remember.
Cool. Let's shift gear a bit and talk about how to contribute to Delve, speaking of testing and so on, what should a potential contributor know before taking the first steps into the project? Derek?
I would say for like a brand new contributor, some of the first steps would be just pull the project down and make sure you can compile it. It's just a typical Go program, so there's not anything too tricky as far as like compiling it, but just doing a simple like getting used to how we do builds, like we have like a tiny little make file that really doesn't do much, but just coordinates running like one other script or something like that to do compilation and whatever. Make sure you can run the test suite and everything passes. If it doesn't pass, you have your first contribution. Fix whatever doesn't pass.
Correct. So I did a talk about this in GopherCon 2018 in Iceland. So that's my introduction to the topic. I also have on my github.io, I have a web page with a list of resources that you can read about debuggers. So that's my contribution to onboarding processes.
Yeah, that was a really cool talk, and it's still actual because as an outsider, Delve hasn't changed that much in terms of structure and so on in the last few years. Right. So yeah, kudos on that too, because the project structure is stable in once you get to understanding, jumping around and finding places to work in, it looks really easy.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of contributions to the project, you recently had the ARM64 version added. There's some other important contributions that are pending, like ARM32 support and so on. What other contributions have you received? Or you're wanting to receive, better said?
I always like when people contribute new architectures and stuff like that, because those are really, really tricky and take a long time to implement. So anytime somebody wants to contribute a new architecture, that's always on a personal level exciting for me, because we can support more architectures, get closer to supporting every single architecture that Go supports, and it's presumably by somebody who already has the hardware, so they can actually work on and develop it. So yeah, S390X and PowerPC, if anybody out there wants to work on that stuff.
About new architectures, ARM32 and MIPS 32-bit, both of those architectures do not have an hardware single-step function in the CPU. So you will have to implement a software single-step if you want to contribute specifically those architecture, and that's going to be very, very hard. Just a warning.
Cool, thank you. It sounds like an interesting challenge for someone
Sure.
But in general, I mean, any contributions are great. Like we've gotten a lot of really great contributions from the community in general over the years. Just like fixing little bugs, adding documentation is always really, really nice. I think we have good amount of documentation, and Allessandro has done a really great job of beefing up our documentation as well throughout the years, as well as several other people. But yeah, any contributions. I know like debuggers are kind of weird esoteric projects, and so yeah, but we've still had like a lot of really great patches come in from the community in general. So
if you want to contribute, something really easy to do is to start from the command line interface, like improve, for example, pretty printing of variables or things like that, adding new, client level commands. That's the easiest thing to do. Because at that point is essentially a normal program, right? There is nothing special to it.
Yeah, we've tried to like organize the code in Delve in such a way that like there's there's a pretty clear line between like just normal Go code and then some of the like really weird low level stuff that we have to do as a debugger to make it work. So you can get away with doing a lot in Delve and contributing a lot to Delve without necessarily first having to take like a deep dive into like, you know, really low level stuff, you know, working with assembly and registers and knowing how Go routine stacks work and all of that stuff. Like you can do a lot of contributions to Delve without really digging into that kind of stuff. We've tried to like insulate some of that stuff so that the rest of the code can be just easier to read and understand and not have to be so involved with the complexities, right? Like kind of isolating the complexities. So yeah, there's tons of opportunities for contribution.
Awesome. Cool. So someone's asking, can you debug Delve in Delve?
Yes, I've done it many times. You
Yeah, me
cannot
too.
record Delve with Delve, however.
Yeah.
But you can
Okay.
debug Delve with Delve.
Derek?
Yeah, it's possible. I've also done it.
So why aren't you not able to record Delve with Delve, Alessandro?
I don't know. That's something in the RR project that doesn't work. Presumably something to do with p-trace emulation that gets screwed up.
Understood. So that's potentially something a contributor could look into.
Well,
figuring out why
that's not Delve, right? That's the RR project. It's in C++ and it's fairly complicated.
Okay, so maybe start from something easier then as a contributor. Let's go over to. Well, I guess we went over to what you'd like to see contributed to the project and so on, because you already said that people can contribute not only the, let's say, deep core stuff, but also things like better printing of variables and stuff like that.
Also,
which
there's work
helps
to
everyone.
be done in function injection. There are things that we don't do, like converting between interfaces while injecting function calls, and the other thing that we don't do is variable function calls, calling function with variable argument lists. Those things are actually not that complicated to do, and it could be something that someone that's motivated to do could potentially do. It's also all self-contained in a single file, so I mean.
Cool. Okay, let me see if we do have any other questions here as we are getting closer to the end. So if you are watching this and you haven't asked your questions yet, please do so, because we only have a few more minutes. And yeah, here's one question that came in. How do you keep Delve easy to use? What's the process when someone wants to add something new or some complex functionality? How do you manage that, Derek? Or
yeah, I mean that's kind of always been like when I started the project, that was always like just a personal goal of mine is to keep the debugger as simple as possible from the user's perspective, and take out a lot of the steps to get you from zero to trying to figure out what's going on. Like I used to like say a lot, like, you know, if you're using a debugger, you're already probably not in a good place, right? Because your code's not working. So the debugger should get out of your way as much as possible. And so that's kind of always been the philosophy. So I keep that like lens in mind when I'm like doing any kind of code review or something that is going to be user visible or affect the user. And that also goes from like what Alessandro was saying before about our API. That's another thing that I consider as like a public part of Go, right? Like just like the CLI and the command line interface, the commands that you use within a debug session, I also consider like the API to be something where it's like, from an outsider's perspective, it should be as easy and simple to use as possible. You shouldn't really have to think about a lot of the complexity. The debugger should do that for you. And even small things like Delve compiling your program for you and disabling optimizations and doing things like that, like just taking those steps out, whatever we can do to kind of lower the barrier from, not having nothing happening to you debugging your program. Like the easiest that we can make that process is kind of always been the ultimate goal of the project. So yeah, whenever I'm doing code reviews for any of that kind of stuff, that's kind of like the lens that I'm looking through. And yeah, hopefully that still rings true. I've heard some other people outside who have used the API say really nice things about it, and things like that. So it's always great to hear that kind of feedback from the community.
Cool. As we are close to the end, where do you see the project in the next few years? Derek?
I would see, I still see I hope the project continues to gain, a lot of adoption. I mean, it's already pretty much ubiquitous throughout the Go community, which is really great. I would like to see, more contributors, and there's a few like features and things like that I would like to see. Ultimately, one of the biggest things for me is parity with being able to debug everywhere that Go can run, and right now that's not something that we can claim. We can debug most of the places that Go runs right now, and the majority of places that people are actually using it. But parity with that would be a big one for me. And then there's a few kind of like loftier features and ideas and stuff like that I would like to implement later on down the road. But yeah, that's, just have it keep existing and being useful.
Alessandro, what about you?
What Derek said. I don't know. We're adding watch point support soon-ish. I don't know.
So there's some things that I think is potentially interesting is like using Delve in places where it's not practical to use it right now. So like one of the things that I've been kind of hacking on Delve a little bit in my free time is like with the trace thing that we were talking about earlier, being able to do a more efficient version of that using like eBPF or something like that, which could be used in an environment where you don't want to slow down the program that you're spying on as much, which can happen a lot with the context switching between ptrace and switching between the kernel and user land and stuff like that. So kind of like expanding on the usefulness of Delve and being able to use it like in like a situation that might be a little bit more performance critical or something like that, is something that is kind of exciting for me, and a potential avenue for what we can see hopefully in the years to come.
Yeah, sounds cool. So look, we are close to the end now. I would like to ask you one other question, which will come from the audience in a second. So this is more Golang question. Sorry for that. And can a feature like a package manager be added to Go? What do you think? I think Go modules already does that.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, I think Go modules is fine. I don't see like really wanting anything like cargo or like having like a gem file if anybody's used to Ruby or anything like that. Like the module system is fine.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. So I think that's about it for today. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's been really lovely.
You're welcome.
I hope that we'll get to do this more often. Who knows? Any last words?
Thanks for inviting us.
Happy, Derek?
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for inviting us to have this chat, and just a general thanks to the Go community for being so supportive of the project and using it, providing feedback, contributions, and everything like that. It's really been great to see from my perspective, where the project has gone, and now there's we have Allessandro working on it, and we just put on a new maintainer for the DApp subsystem, and the community has been really involved and great with it. So yeah, thanks to all the Gophers who use it, contribute to it, give us feedback. We really appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you so much. So for everyone watching, this is where you can go and get involved in a project and so on. For more information in general, you can visit our website or follow us on Twitter. You can follow Derek on Twitter. Allessandro, you don't have a Twitter, but you have a GitHub account. And yeah, that's it for today. Thanks for joining, and see you in the next one.